Hey, so in this video I'm doing something slightly different. I'm not streaming, I'm simply recording. This is gonna be part of the work I'm doing to build the Pulumi Schema Explorer. I've been wanting to work on it, but couldn't really stream, but I still want to record what I'm doing, so I think this is like a good middle ground for me to work on it, record, and later publish it to YouTube. So with that, let's get started. Continue from where I left off. So let me show you how far I am with the project. Of course, I've been doing a bit off screen, like a bit of a cleanup work, added a nice feature to search GitHub for Pulumi resources. So let me show you that when it's all working. I think Webpack finished running, so me go to localhost 8080, and this is how it looks right now. It's a bit different than the last stream because, as you can see right now, for example, you can select local plugins from this drop down. Click on it, it will load the schema. So these are my local installed Pulumi plugins with their different versions. I've also added a new view for the Pulumi Explorer, which shows 3 tabs: the general, which shows general information about the schema, the resources tab and their number, their count, the ability to filter by module, and of course search the module you want, and filter by resource. So if I want to filter by this module, I will only see the resources that are related to that module in the AWS provider. Or you can go back to all, in which case you will see all of the resources. Now this is pretty interesting now that I can see the number of resources, because if I go from latest v5.26 to like all the way back to v20, I will see that I have less resources, and in a future version I would like to see which resources have been added, have been removed, and have been changed. So I'm building this explorer with the idea that I'm going to build a differ at the end. So here we have resources. Right now when you select a resource, you don't see anything. That's also a feature I want to add, where you can see the resource information right underneath. Same idea with functions. Want to get more information about them when you click on them. So I have these two running. That's pretty nice. And I've also implemented a GitHub search. So these plugins right now are installed on my machine locally, but if I want to look for one that I don't have, such as the Azure native plugins, I could just search here. So if I say Pulumi Azure, it will start loading in this drop down, and once it shows result, it will automatically open it. So now this is using the GitHub search API. I will show you in a bit how that works. So it's basically exactly like in your normal GitHub search, and here you can select a repository. Now once you've selected a repository like Azure or Azure Native, let's go with Azure Native, or maybe Azure AD because it's a bit smaller, what it will do, it will immediately start looking up the releases of that repository which map to a plugin version. So notice that I've selected a Pulumi repository, which is special because the way we load Pulumi plugins from the CLI is special. We assume they're coming from the organization. So let me click on this, for example, 5.32.0, and what will happen when you select the release is that it will change the URL to just Azure AD and the version, just like just like basically my normal local plugins, and that works. I can see the resources and the functions in that release from this repository. That works really nicely. I really like how this works. What I don't like is that if we have a third party plugin like Pulumi Scaleway. So here we have a Pulumi plugin in a third party repository. So this is not coming from the official Pulumi organization. I could still select it and I can still see releases, and this in fact happens to be this library, which is indeed a Pulumi plugin, except that it's coming from a third-party provider, third-party organization on GitHub. So the way we have to get the schema here is different, and right now it won't really work. So if I select this, it will just put the URL right here, and it won't really work, which is not what we want. But I will handle third-party libraries in a later recording. I think. I don't think I have a good way to do it right now. So for the time being, I will stick to doing other things right here. So what I want to do in this video, since for some schemas I have a repository URL and I am looking at a specific version of the schema, I want to add a tab here that is called the release notes, right? Which will load the release notes from this repository for this version, for this release. So let me show you. So if I go here, we will see releases. Oh, I also see that we have a new release that I don't have locally. I basically want to see the change log, right? I want to load this information here onto a tab here. So this involves using the GitHub Search API and loading the markdown, I believe, from the changelog here, because I think this is markdown, and rendering it here on a tab. So let me see how we can do that. This is of course only if we have a repository URL, because we never can tell where a Pulumi plugin is coming from. Maybe you just build one locally and it's not published yet in our repository, so you don't have release notes or anything like that. So with that, let's see what we can do. So here, by the way, you can see this code on my GitHub at the name of the repository is Pulumi Schema Explorer, where I'm pushing all my updates. So here is the part, yeah, we have the plugin explorer. Here is the part where I have a bunch of tabs and I keep track of the selected tab to show different components. So when I'm looking at the general tab, I render a component called general schema info. When I'm looking at the resources, I'm rendering the resources. When I'm looking at the functions, rendering the functions, etc, etc. So what I want to do is rendering the release notes. So that is here will be release notes, right? And there will be release notes for this schema, and I will also take its version just in case it's not available in the schema itself. The release notes is gonna be a new component. Let's build that. So that is a new React component. Let release notes, it takes a schema and it takes a version. Yeah, because basically I want to use the URL of the schema, right? Okay, let me see. That will be HTML none for the time being because I don't have its implementation yet. So let's see, we add a tab here when we have a repository. So match schema repository, which is a string option with some repo. If we have a repo, then we add this new tab, and GitHub Copilot understands exactly what I want. Release notes, yeah, that looks pretty good. And if I have anything else, then I want HTML none. I don't really care about the repo itself here. I just wanna show a tab. So maybe I could even go like if is some, which means has value. Well, it's fine to match it like that. So if I have a repository, then add the tab called release notes, and then here we have the release notes, which takes a schema and a version. Now at this point, when I am viewing this release notes, I can assume that a repository has a value. So so I could immediately use it without checking for its existence, even though that's like better to do. So let me do that. But before even showing release notes, I need to actually go to GitHub and load that markdown content. So let me do that. I go to the server, and here I've cleaned up a lot of the code that I started with. So now I have a GitHub search, I have a find GitHub releases, which I will use again, along with the git local plugins and stuff like that. And now what I want is a new function on the back end that takes, let's see, getting release notes would probably take a URL of the repository and a version. I think that makes sense. So type get release notes request will be repository, which is a string, and it takes a version, which is also a string. So get release notes request, get release notes returns a async of a string, which is the markdown content we care about. So once I add this, the server will break because I don't have an implementation for that in my Schema Explorer API, which means let me do that here. Let's get the release notes. This takes a request, which is a get release notes request, and returns an async of a string. And that is very close. Well, I think GitHub Copilot is doing the work for me. That's nice. So the request of the repository split it. I think I just simply want to remove the full URL, right? GitHub release repository get all. I think I want to just get one, not get all. We are talking about getting all the releases for this repository. So yeah, I think the get request takes a repository in the form of yeah, let's make that more clear. So it will be owner string repository name, repository and version. I think that's nicer and makes it more clear what we're talking about, right? So we have that on the server side. I don't want to split. Don't want to do any splitting. Don't do any weird things. It's okay to return an empty string for now. So when we get all the releases or request for this owner and request repository, then we check, then we filter. Yes, so we filter where the version is equal to the request version. Yeah, that makes sense. And finally return the release body. Otherwise return empty string, which is fine. That is fine. So let's give that a try. Get release notes. Gonna restart the server now. And before I even, oh, it works. So before I even go to the client and start adding things there, I will actually use the docs API from remoting to test this bit. So what I will do is go here, so go to the server API and go to the API docs. I will see that get release notes is actually added here automatically, of course, and I can test it. So owner will be Pulumi. Repository is Pulumi AWS, and version is, well, latest was 5.27.0. So let's try that out, and we have an error. See why we have that. Needs to be an array of inputs. Never mind. Oh, there we go. It was just doing its thing. So this is the changelog. It's a string which has commit hashes. It has issue numbers. I feel like these issue numbers can be converted, but I also don't want to work on that right just now, because now it looks like a header. I don't want to render that as a header. But anyways, that means that this means that we can get release notes from GitHub easily. So here I'm actually using the GitHub client from OctoKit. I'm using OctoKit GitHub client, which is pretty nice, pretty easy to work with, and I use it across my functions. Yeah, as you can see, it works, easy peasy. So now let's use it from the front end. Index. As always, we use deferred. So release notes is React use deferred, and get release notes takes the request, and it's dependent on the schema and the version. It's dependent on the schema. Or maybe it should just take a URL, to be honest, that's easier. Release notes for repository. So repository is a string. And we provide that string from schema, repository, and just value. Just to be safe, maybe a default arg would be good. So by default arg empty string, just in case there's some weirdness with the rendering and I don't want to get like a undefined exception. So default arg get an empty string when you can't find it, even though that doesn't really happen. So now get release notes takes the request. Let's do that. So here get release notes. I'm just gonna make it into its own nicer function call, and it's inlined, so all good. First, the repository repo. Manage repository. Well, first let's clean up some things. So first of all, full repo name will be the repository without the first part, so without HTTP. So remove HTTP, this thing with, and in case it was using just HTTP without HTTPS, also remove it. Then remove github.com/, yeah, that sounds good. So this is the full repo name. Now we match full repo name, split by this with owner and a repo. Then we simply return, yeah, I just made up this thing. Yeah, so we just return, or let's make the request is these things, and we will return from the Schema Explorer API get release notes request. If it didn't work, return empty string. That's fine. Okay, looks good. Get release notes. So release notes is a deferred of a string, which means that we can start matching on it. So match release notes with deferred as not started yet, deferred in progress, loading release notes. It's failed, we show the error message, and finally when it has resolved into the markdown release notes body, then yeah, dangerously said inner HTML is not exactly what we want, because this is gonna be markdown, but initially I just want to see the raw markdown that was returned. So HTML in a pre, just like that. Here it almost didn't work, and replace. Yes, there we go. Repository is repo. That's a good thing. Let me make a one-liner out of that. It doesn't need to be expanded. Okay, that looks cleaner. Yeah, looks good. Let's see what that gives me. So if I go back to 8080, select a plugin, and I see I have a new tab here, loading release notes. Hey, that's nice. That is very nice. Except now I don't want to render it like this. Let's render it as markdown. So for that I will use a library called Feliz Markdown. Surprise, surprise. Let me stop the server, go to source client, and the right way to do it is using femto. So .NET femto install release markdown, which will install the NuGet package as well as the React dependency that it depends on, which is React Markdown. So if we do this, using NuGet to install Feliz Markdown, that's good. Resolving packages using femto resolve, which will realize that it needs React Markdown. Yeah, now it's installing React Markdown with the right version that Feliz Markdown depends on, and it's all good. I think I can start using it. So that is open release markdown, and here instead of a HTML pre will be markdown. Takes the source markdown and renders it as HTML. So I saved, go back to the root, and .NET run the thing. Okay, .NET Launch started. Started Fable compilation. I think Fable hasn't finished compiling yet. Yes, now it has. Running Webpack, bundling. Yeah, it's working again. Let's see how that looks like. Refresh. Still loading the schema, taking a while. Release notes. Okay, that is kind of markdown. Yeah, because this should have been like a heading, right? Should have been like a heading. And I think that's because Bulma is interfering with the classes here. Bulma does have a fix for that, I believe. If you wrap this inside of a class name called content, so that Rob children are a markdown. See? Excuse the TV in the background that just run on its own. Release notes, loading release notes, and that looks more like it. Now we can see a lot more things. Let's look at another release, like the v5.25, which is local, so it should not take that long, but I feel like I should make the schema loading a lot faster. Release notes, yeah. So yeah, that is how we add this feature. Pretty nice, pretty nice. Okay, that's one of the things I wanted to add, so that's nice. What I want to add next is also a tab here with all the versions, because even though you can like look it up here, it's annoying to have to look it up twice when you have it available here. So another versions tab here would be nice, but I will do that in another stream, I think, or recording in this case. It was pretty smooth to add this feature. Hope you liked it, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.